and Darcy Pullum. Darcy isn't here, and so we'll just skip that for now. So Matt Erickson, our speaker tonight, I'm going to just keep rolling, and if anybody needs to, feel free to get up during his talk and go to the restroom. Sorry, Matt. So Matt lives in Quincy. He's founder and president of Foundation for Liberty and Patriot Corps. He's also the author of 12 self-published public domain books, 6 nonfiction books, titles 200 Years of Tyranny, Understanding Federal Tyranny, Waging War Without Congress First Defining It, Patriot Quest, Dollars and Nonsense, and Monetary Laws of the United States, as well as 6 novels. So, Lori, we have, I counted 44 a few minutes ago, and we got 3 more walking in, so what's that make us 47, I guess? So up your count for that, for this portion of the meeting. So Matt, thank you so much for coming, and the hour is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So am I correct in understanding that the microphone is not working? Is that right?
I think it's working.
Oh, working now?
We're using this microphone up here.
Okay, so I don't need this? For sure.
Yes,
Yes, I don't?
yes, you do not. Don't. Just project.
Okay. Okay, thanks for having me. My name is Matt Erickson. Before I'll just talk a little bit about the books and then just put those in the back burner. But I think I brought enough of these to hand out complimentary to every family here. I don't think I have enough for every person. That on your way out, just stop by my table. It's my simplest nonfiction book, but I'm urging people to read it. I'm moving short. Well, my wife and I put our house up for sale, and so this is the only book that I printed in bulk, and so we have something to kind of get rid of. So I don't, because I don't have storage capacity. So I'm hoping people will take that opportunity to read through a little bit. And then my strongest recommendation is my book, Learning the Constitution and More, Restore Our American Republic. And this is alternately available in digital form. If you'd rather watch short videos, listen to short audios, or read individual PDFs online, you can get it in that form. Or if you like bound books, it's available here. It's $60 for that one. Then novel here, my favorite novel, Trapped by Political Desire. The hardback is $40, the soft cover is $30, and then the rest of the books are in the $17 to $20 range, the paperbacks. So I've written actually 14 books, but 12 of them, everything beyond these 2, are in the public domain. So you can read those free of charge at my website, as long as you don't mind scrolling through PDF. And so when you leave, pick up one of these, but I also ask you to get one of these cards here too. So this one has on the Learn the Constitution and More website. So you can, everybody can go to that website and you can sign in your email and get an email back to you with a link to read 7 of the lessons, about 15% of the book free of charge. I urge you to go through and take a look at that. And then on this book, the flyer here has the actual Patriot Corps website where all the information is. But there's a lot. I've got, besides the 14 books, dozens and dozens of public domain newsletters too. This condenses down probably about 35,000 hours of my effort over the last 35 years. And so it's my life's work, basically. But I want to talk today mainly on the Constitution and our founding principles. We have to realize that, okay, so because we're talking about the U.S. Constitution, this doesn't deal with state and local issues. So what I'm going to speak about talks at the federal level. So I'm a kind of a top-down guy, where a lot of people are bottom-up, grassroots. I argue that it's hard for the states to go forward in 50 different ways on all the reserved powers, because you have the federal government interfering with the reserve powers of the states, in so many different ways that they're kind of mandating uniformity on all the things that the states should be going forward. And I argue the best way to do is to clean up the federal powers, even though people say, oh, that's so big, we can't deal with it. That's not true. Where I argue that my job is kind of like that of Toto and Wizard of Oz, as people are lined up to see the supposedly all-powerful wizard. You know, he says, I'm the great and powerful Oz, you know, but yet, so I'm trying to tell him, well, first of all, listen to his message. He claims to be great and powerful, but he needs Dorothy to go get magic slippers for him. So he, you know, what does he need magic slippers for if he's all powerful? But, so my job is to search out the source of the stench, pull back the curtain and bark like crazy to draw the attention. The only thing that matters is what is going on behind the curtain. How do our elected and appointed federal servants falsely appear to be our political masters? If you look at so the U.S. Constitution is divided into the originally ratified Constitution is divided into 7 articles. The 7th article talks about the ratification process, about each state had to ratify the Constitution. Before that, the state divided up its governing authority and gave a portion of its former governing powers to Congress and the President and the courts to exercise their daily powers. So we have to realize that with that division, when the states ratified the Constitution into existence, they divided allowable governing powers in this country into named federal powers per the Constitution and reserving the remainder powers to the states. And those governmental type powers that weren't delegated either federal or state or local were reserved to be the people. That's the 10th Amendment talks about that. And so when the states declared their independence from Great Britain, they declared themselves to be free and independent states, which is free and independent not only of Great Britain, but also of each other. So the Second Continental Congress, the delegates from each of the states were meeting at, back in Philadelphia, and, from 1776. The Articles of Confederation were proposed a year later, but they weren't ratified until 1781. So for the bulk of the Revolutionary War, the states just kind of joined through the Confederation Congress, and there was no separate delineation of power. It was just they kind of, basically like a group of ambassadors meeting together for common concerns. Maybe they're, trying to achieve independence. But when the states, colonies declared their independence, became free and independent states, you can picture this as a pie chart. So this chart shows that government power devolved onto each state individually. But when those states later formed together, ratified the U.S. Constitution, the powers became delineated or separated into named federal authority, this blue wedge of authority. Say if this was a clock, digital clock on the wall, say from noon, or say 12 a.m. to 11 a.m., represents the reserve powers of the states. Well, this 11 to 12 o'clock wedge represented those powers named in the U.S. Constitution that were given to members of Congress and the President and the Supreme Court Justice. So this is important to realize that government, members of Congress, if you look at Article 1, so Constitution, we were divided into 7 articles. Article 7 talks about the ratification process. Who ratified the Constitution in existence? The states. So the states are the principals, or the decision makers in the named federal powers. So we're led to believe, from infancy on up, that Congress, you often hear about co-equal powers of Congress, the checks and balances, or co-equal powers of government in the legislative, executive, judicial. The concept of co-equality between Congress and the executive and judicial branches is false, absolutely false. And I can show that very clearly. And that's why, first of all, that during the ratification debates, James Madison talked about, in a Republican form of government, the legislature necessarily predominates. And that's why over half of the originally ratified Constitution spoke to Article 1, the legislative powers of Congress. And that's very important because that's where members of Congress are giving named powers that they can implement directly throughout the Union using the necessary and proper means. So we have to realize that Congress doesn't have all the legislative power. They have all legislative powers that are herein granted. And so that by the legislative powers being vested or fixed in Congress means that members of Congress cannot delegate those main powers to the presidents, to executive agency bureaucrats, to the courts, to the judges, to legislate from the bench, to foreign diplomats, to UN Security Council, or anything else. So we have to understand our job is to become what I say is responsible parents to our kids who have gone back to District of Columbia and have done what they want for generations. So we have to learn. It's up to us individually to see through what I call the make-believe rule of paper tyrants who proclaim magical powers. And so we have to make sense of 200 years of escalating federal nonsense, because you look at Article 6 of the Constitution, and it says this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made pursuant thereof, talks also about treaties, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges of their state shall be bound. So this word bound is a very important thing. So the states are bound to the Constitution, so the states are bound themselves. Remember, the states ratified the Constitution in existence, so they had to make the decision. But once they gave up those main federal powers to Congress and the executive and the judicial, they said, okay, you are our agent. We're going to elect delegates from our states to meet in Congress who enact law according to their delegated powers. And so we have to realize that the states became bound once they ratified it. So in Article 7, again, the ratification of conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states to ratify the same. What that says is the states cannot be bound by the Constitution until they individually willingly accepted it. And so with 9 state ratifications in 1788, the Confederation Congress set aside time the following March, in the spring of 1789, to begin Congress under the Constitution. During that time, 2 more states ratified the Constitution. So in 1789, in March, 11 of the states, those states who had ratified the Constitution, began. So North Carolina and Rhode Island had not yet ratified the Constitution. So they were not party in 1789. They had nothing to do with electing George Washington as president. They had established the Supreme Court, kind of coordinate the Supreme Court and get them. So we have to realize that no state could be bound against its will. And so the states, so we have to always remember the states are the principals. The co-equality of Congress, President, and Judicial says that they are checks and balances, so they each have equal amount of powers. There's no principle above them, and they decide amongst themselves what powers they're going to exercise. That is absolutely wrong. And again, over half the originally ratified Constitution speaks to the legislative powers of Congress, whereas the executive powers given the President, less than 25% of the words spoke to that. But only 377 words spoke to the judicial powers of the Supreme Court. So there's over 6 times as many words in the U.S. Constitution dealing with the legislative powers of Congress than there are the judicial power of the courts. And so that's important to say. So instead of saying if the concept of co-equality basically says the more you talk about something, the less powers those words hold. And that they're trying to say, hey, let's get rid of, out of 343 words of the judicial powers of Article 3, just talk about the judicial power of the United States should be vested in one Supreme Court, and such inferior courts, the Congress shall from time to time ordain and establish. That would be those first 30 words of the Article 3 of the Constitution. And they could just eliminate the rest of the Article 3 and not prescribe it all. And so basically the concept of co-equality is a falsehood that conservatives have believed because we're listening to our political adversaries who push unlimited power to get us to not realize what's going on. And so I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and don't worry if you cannot understand it on the first hearing of it. It's not important that you follow it. It's important that you, I'm trying to kind of jolt your brain to thinking, to realize there's more out there that we are not aware of. And our indifference or ignorance or inability to pursue this or understand it is what will keep us enslaved. So I argue that we the people can can cast off this make-believe rule of paper tyrants who proclaim magical powers because there's no magic. So we have to see through the lies and the corruption and the deceit. So this next clause here, Article 6, the Constitution, Clause 3, is perhaps some of the most important concept in the whole Constitution to understand. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both in the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. That word shall be, the phrase shall be bound, as we saw earlier, the states get bound by this, but then the senators and representatives are also bound to this deal. So they're being bound. And the Constitution talks about other people being bound too. And in Article 1, where it talks about representative direct tax shall be apportioned among the several states for apportionment purposes for determining the number of representatives in each state, and also at that time direct taxes. Talks about and persons, including those persons bound to service for a term of years, and excluding any is not taxed, and previous all other persons. Persons, all the other persons bound to service, those were indentured servants who were bound to service, typically for a period of 5 to 7 years, to learn a trade, or a lot of them were brought over as indentured servants to pay for passage here to the New World, way back when, in the 1700s and whatnot. But by 1787, when the Constitution was proposed, there were still people who came over willingly. They just said, okay, I don't have money to pay for passage, but I'll work 5 to 7 years typically, and I'll have room and board and a job lined up, and they'll keep me, house and feed me and teach me a skill, and then I'll be a master, after their apprenticeship. Go after that. But then also later it talks about persons held to service or labor. So it talks about indentured servants again and slaves. So to the same degree to which indentured servants and slaves were held or bound to service or to labor back then, it's the same words that the U.S. Constitution binds federal servants to that sort of supports the Constitution. So that shows that federal servants are truly our servants. They are not our political masters. We do not have to search for angels to elect or appoint to positions of unlimited power. It's up to us to learn to understand we the people through our states we're the decision makers. No federal servant can ever change the Constitution. No federal servant can ever change their own powers that they may directly exercise throughout the year. So everything beyond the spirit of the Constitution that is incrementally coming to be in our last 200 years is but lies and deceit and corruption and fraud that we have to learn to see through. And so it's up to us to learn to see through that falsehood that where we're giving up our birthright as Americans, or our naturalized right, or even our guest rights, or whatever, that we do not have political masters. This country is supposed to be different than all of the other countries in the world. We have, the U.S. Constitution gave us the most limited government on the face of the planet. And so we have to understand, how do those federal servants appear to be our political masters? And that's what all my effort over the last 35 years has been, trying to document and research and dive into different things that I'll probably get going down some rabbit holes here, and I apologize for that. But my brain kind of jumps from different places. That's what's helping me kind of find some of this stuff, but it's a little harder to convey it, maybe intelligently. But my written work, I think, is better than my spoken word here. But the Constitution, remember, it originally ratified and gave a small amount of weight, main powers. Now there is an amendment process where members of Congress, the delegates of the states who meet together in a meeting of the states, they can propose amendments to the Constitution. There have been over 11,700 attempted amendment proposals since 1789, but only 27 have been ratified. First 10 are the Bill of Rights, so they basically actually even restricted powers a little bit. They were further declaratory restrictive clauses added to prevent misconstruction or abuse of federal powers, further kind of delineations of what government couldn't do. But let's say the other 17 amendments, total increased federal power a little bit. So what we think of, so we this was what started, basically this is approximately what the Constitution authorizes today. It's It's not, it doesn't matter if it's just a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, or a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, but it's representative, this here is close enough. But what people come to think of when they look at what's going on, I got to try to make sense of this nonsense, because we cannot cure what we can't diagnose. But we can cure what we can diagnose. So if we can diagnose what we face, we can cure it. And I argue that at the federal level, politically we face but one problem only, which is how do federal servants, how do they, nevertheless, after they swear that oath to support the Constitution, which binds them to its terms, which means they can't change it, which means they never change it, how do they then appear to ignore or bypass their normal constitutional parameters of impunity? So whether they do it in this case or that case or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's just if you can look at the things from the lowest common denominator, what's the most common thing is they appear to be able to do, when everyday federal actions come up against the Constitution, the supreme law of land, which every federal servant has sworn to support, it looks like to us that the Constitution folds and federal activity just, this looks almost irrelevant. And so, and of course, those who want to exercise unlimited power want you to believe that. And so, we have to learn, how are they succeeding? How does this, which is the only, we face this today directly throughout the Union period. This is what we really have if we will simply learn what's going on and reclaim it. But it looks like this blue wedge has grown bigger and bigger and bigger, all but almost devouring the states. So it looks like this is what we face today. And I'm here to tell you this is but a false mirage. It does not exist. It's a phantom, and you cannot kill phantoms. So that's why we have lost ground year by year, decade by decade, generation by generation, and century by century, because we have not identified that single political problem, which is how do federal servants appear to our political masters? How do they swear that oath? And they all have to swear that oath, to support the Constitution, or in the President's case, to execute his office and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. In Article 2, it gives that oath for the President. Before he enter on the execution of office, he shall take, and then describe that. So that oath is mandatory because it's binding. And for anybody who gets elected or appointed, they say, the oath, I can ignore that. And tell them to do that up front. Do not take that oath and see where they go. They all take the oath, every one of them, and then they later say that it's not binding. Well, tell them to put their money where their mouth is. Like a U.S. representative has to give a new oath every 2 years after he gets reelected. Tell them, don't take that oath then. That next Congress, don't take the oath. And stand up and say it. And they will all take that oath because it is binding, and they do it. It's binding because it's mandatory. So that means they cannot change the Constitution, nor can they change their main powers that they can everywhere in the country direct exercise. So that means it's up to us to learn what's going on and finally respond intelligently. And so that's what my effort is to try to make sense of what's going on. Now, people. Probably, I don't know if I see any sports hats in here for some baseball team or football team or anything like that, but Americans know their sports pretty well. They know the rules of baseball, football, soccer, So, unfortunately, Americans don't really know the Constitution. So how are you to know what's going on if you don't know the rules of the game? And so I'm here to kind of speed that up real quick and let you. So just like, okay, let's say in grammar. You have the rule I before E except after C. So in the normal case, you spell something I-E, but in some cases, it's E-I. And so you have rules that often whenever there's a rule, there's an exception to the rule. And so we cannot ignore the exception to the rule, like in soccer. If I was to say soccer players can never touch the ball with their hands, is that a true statement? No, because goalies are a player, and they can touch the ball with their hands. And even the field members, they can throw in the ball from the sidelines into play, so they can touch. So there's even exceptions in the rules of soccer to touch the ball with your hands. So we cannot ignore the exceptions to the rule and act like they do not exist. And so it's important for us to not only look at the normal case of allowable federal action that may directly be exercised throughout the Union, but we have to learn the exception to the rule. And the U.S. Constitution has an exception to the rule. And I'll talk about this here shortly. That this chart here shows the 10-mile square diagonal here that is the District of Columbia. So the portion up here north and east was given up by Maryland in 1791. The portion south and west was given up by Virginia to form a 10-mile by 10-mile, 10-mile square, 100 square miles, about 64,000 acres, parcel of land for the District of Columbia. And then that's found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, which talks about Congress exercising exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the district which will become the seat of the government. And so it's exclusive legislation. So remember when I talked about the normal case of allowable federal action shows this division of governmental power throughout the Union. This does not show exclusive legislation power. So we know that this is not the abnormal case, the highly unusual exception from the District of Columbia does not follow the normal case of allowable federal actions that are maybe directly exercised throughout the Union. And not even this shows the exclusive legislation, just a single imperative. So this, as I said, does not exist. But when Congress exercises exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the District of Columbia, this is what we face. So there's two separate rules, so to speak, in the Constitution that have always been there since it was ratified in 1788, operable in 1789. It has normal case, allowable federal action, the most limited government on the face of the earth, where members of Congress can exercise named federal powers directly throughout the Union and implement them using necessary and proper means. If it's a named power and it was unnecessary but proper, members of Congress still could not do that. If it was a named power that was necessary but they went about it improperly, members of Congress still could not do that. It has to be a named power, and they've got to implement it using necessary and proper means, and then members of Congress can do that. So that's what we have in the normal case. At the opposite end of the political spectrum, where you have the federal authority that they can do everywhere in the Union, but also where the states would act according to their state constitutions, you have Congress doing that. To meet that qualification to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. And so in this ability, members of Congress can exercise this state-like ability in the District of Columbia without contravening the Constitution, because it's not meant to apply throughout the Union. So we have to look, so when the state legislator, the governor, the state courts act, when they work within the reserved powers, they look to their state constitution to know how to act. But there is no state constitution. Maryland's state constitution does not apply in the District of Columbia. The U.S. Constitution only has one clause in the whole Constitution that talks about all these powers. It says Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. So within their own inherent discretion, members of Congress may in the District of Columbia do as they please, as long as they don't violate some express prohibition, like in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. So even the District of Columbia, because there is a name prohibition that in the First Amendment, that Congress cannot establish a state religion in the District of Columbia. So other than that, members of Congress have the inherent ability to do as they please in the District of Columbia without running afoul of the Constitution, because it's not meant for direct exercise throughout the Union. And remember that I talked about the named legislative powers are vested in Congress, and that's because of the Article 4, Section 4 requirement for a Republican form of government in every state of the Union. The Republican form of government is that based on legislative representation, where we the people, through the states, elect people to be members of Congress who exercise named powers using necessary and proper means. That's that delegation of authority that you give to this person to act within this authority. So if any realtors in here, maybe you represent a buyer or seller of a home, and they've entered a contract with you where you act as their agent to do a specific thing. So they say, okay, we want you to sell this house for this amount of money, list it, and that we're not giving you authority to sell the contents, we're not giving you authority to sell the car, we're not selling you authority to sell the boat. But if the realtor say, well, hey, I want this 5 or 6% commission on not just your house, but I want to do the boat and stuff too, and I'm going to sell it out from under you, well, that becomes a problem. So it's up to the principal, whether it be the homeowner in that case, or we the people, or the states, to enforce the constitutional parameters that every federal servant has already sworn to support. And so we cannot enforce what we don't know. But all they're doing is they're using an allowed special power for the District of Columbia beyond legitimate boundaries. And yes, ma'am.
So what can we do?
Well, there's a...
What's your suggestion that we do about this?
Right. Well, the first I say is get informed. We have to understand what it is we're facing to quit making wrong arguments.
So which of your books is the one we should...
This is the... I recommend this strongly. This, like I say, it's $60 for the book or the digital course. The one thing I do like about the fiction novels is that they have characters in them who can talk back and forth. So this kind of is just like my content here today. I'm kind of throwing you a little information and a whole lot more, and then I'm producing stuff into a whole lot of information down your throat. But this goes through your own pace. The short little lessons, 4 to 8 pages, 10 to 15 minutes of the video or audio. But there's 38 of the lessons there. But this is the most complete and thorough. This is the best. There's some easier reading ones there. But it's mainly, so I want to make sure I
know the Constitution?
I'm sorry?
And then do what?
Right, well, we have to fight things correctly. When we say, okay, the Department of Education seems to be up, the Federal Department of Education, okay, the Constitution says nothing about education. So, it goes back to the states. Well, but we cannot say the Department of Education is unconstitutional. It's too general, too broad. It's not narrowly defined. It's inaccurate. It's actually an error. It's wrong. So we can't say they can never do it because under the District of Columbia power and the exclusive legislative powers of Congress, members of Congress, okay, remember what I said, members of Congress have that vested power, legislative powers, that in the District of Columbia, so only states of the Union elect U.S. Senators and U.S. Representatives to meet in Congress. The District of Columbia, residents there do not have a voting representative or a senator to represent them. So they're not even legislative representation, the fundamental building block of the Union, where we say, we the people are choosing these people, these delegates to meet together to work on these issues. So there is no district representation. So there cannot be a crime or foul if members of Congress, in doing all this state-like authority where in the state legislature, you have all these different, organizations being involved doing, education, doing, the criminal court systems and stuff like that. So members of Congress may delegate their exclusive legislative powers to federal servants of the alphabet agencies, the FDAs, the EPAs, and stuff like that without crime or foul. Because that is not dealing with this power, it's dealing with that power. So we cannot say that is unconstitutional. Basically, it's what they call facially unconstitutional or on its face, or in every case, whenever Congress enacts law on this topic, that's not allowed. We can't say that because of this reserved, that exclusive legislative authority of Congress. So we have to learn to say that's unconstitutional as applied beyond the District of Columbia. And there's also the second part of that, Article 168, Clause 17, would deal with that exclusive legislative powers. It also talks about areas ceded, that's C-E-D-E-D, as a cession, C-E-S-S-I-O-N, where you give up, that's where secession comes from. But it's when a particular state gives up a named parcel of ground to the federal government for like lighthouses, the federal courthouses, post office, military forts. So those areas, may be exclusive federal parcels. That's a parcel by parcel basis. Now, if you just think of maybe the District of Columbia, and so we have to learn to be accurate. We can't say, so we have to say the Department of Education cannot be, the Congress cannot have, give powers to the Department of Education under the executive branch, and the Department of Education mandates to the state to follow this, and this. We have to learn to say it's unconstitutional as applied beyond the District of Columbia. So we have to narrow our argument, narrow our claim, and be accurate and be precise.
So you're saying the Department of Education is unconstitutional?
Nope. It's absolutely constitutional for the District of Columbia.
That's what I meant.
Right.
So outside of the District of Columbia, it's unconstitutional?
Well, and outside the, military force and stuff, that can be done too, because there's no state, so you just have to think. So there's been a lot of problems over the generations and centuries with, like say, think of a big military base, Fort Lewis, whatever it is now. How many military people live there? Well, there's no state laws in that, federal enclave that would deal with marriage, divorce, births, deaths, education, police. And so these areas have to, so we have to learn to say, it's good, it's loud there, it's not, you can't, so the states have to learn to stand up and say, no, we're not, so just like Oregon's laws cannot bind Washington, which cannot bind Idaho, which cannot bind Montana or whatever, neither can the District of Columbia's exclusive legislative powers that are state-like powers bind the states against the will when the state defends themselves properly. So, again, I talked about the top-down type guy. The federal government is the easiest thing to correct because we don't have to correct anything. We have the Constitution that the founders and framers gave us changed only by 27 ratified amendments. And even though there's 3 amendments that I'd like to get rid of, they're overall very, we have a wonderful Constitution. And so we don't have to change government. We don't have to search for angel-selected positions of power. We have to learn to identify what we face and respond accordingly. Ultimately, I do say that we need one of two. After we put all the wild stallions back in the District of Columbia corral, I say we ultimately pursue one of 2 amendments, either to contain tyranny to D.C., or we repeal that Article 1, Clause 17, and get rid of the District of Columbia entirely and all the federal forts and let them go back to the state which seated them. So we can either say, okay, you can do all this. So the 11th Amendment, let me step back from it. We have the model by the amendments for 2 routes going forward. The 11th Amendment was ratified in 1795 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a case where it said that the state, it was Georgia, it was being sued in the federal court against its will. And then by Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, it looks like the states can be sued against their will in the federal court. And the Supreme Court held that, and the states very quickly proposed and ratified the 11th Amendment, which says that the Constitution, as just declared by the Supreme Court, shall not be construed to mean what the court just said. So again, the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of what the meaning of the Constitution is. The states are. The 11th Amendment proves that. The states overruled the Supreme Court, and I didn't understand why the Supreme Court ruled as they did it. To me, it looks like I understand why why they ruled that way. But the state said, we're not going to allow ourselves to be sued in federal court against our will. So here's the 11th Amendment, which overturned that court ruling that says, you're not going to construe those words to mean that. So right now, there's 2 main clauses. We have to have a legitimate basis for their actions. And that's under the District of Columbia power, the exclusive legislative power. So that's how they put all these federal legislation things into existence by that lawful authority. So they have a small sliver of authority to do that. So how did they then expand it beyond that area? So that comes up. So when I read earlier Article 6, and remember I said this Constitution and the laws of the United States which will be made pursuance thereof, and also it talks about treaties a little bit, shall be the supreme law of land that binds the states and their judges. So that appears to say that that this whole Constitution and all the laws which Congress enacts and in pursuance of every clause of the Constitution is part of that supreme law of the land that binds the states and their judges. So when Congress enacts a law under the District of Columbia power, say in education, that is really only for the District of Columbia and federal forts, magazines, articles, dockyards, and other needful buildings, that is a legitimate purpose. And so if they try and then bind the states against their will, and the states don't know any better, and they fight on the wrong side, it's unconstitutional, it's in violation of the 10th Amendment, which, is interfering with reserve powers. But it's not the judge's place, really, to be your judge, or be your attorney and argue the wrong, and correct your attorney's error in his brief. If he's making the wrong claims, you're going to lose in court. And so if the states make the wrong claim, if they don't know what's going on, to identify it. So, but anyhow, that what it comes down to is even laws, exclusive legislative laws enacted by Congress under the exclusive legislative authority of the District of Columbia is under the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, one of the powers of the Constitution, one of the named clauses. So the Article 6 appears to say that even laws enacted by Congress in pursuance of this exclusive legislative authority form part of the supreme law of land that bind the states and their judges. And so we have to, so it's just, all it is incumbent upon us to learn what's going on. And I argue the two things we have to do is learn what's going on, tell others. Learn and tell. Learn what's going on and spread the word. I think I am very adept and good at trying to figure out 200 years of nonsense, but I am not a public speaker. I'm not, I don't claim to be a novelist or anything like that, but I'm passionate to try and pursue this. I'm looking for help from people to, take my content to your contacts. I've had my nose basically buried in a, book or a, library or a computer for, 35 years, outside my paying work. And so, I don't really know how to, I know this is about the 6th or so presentation I've given, and I'm leaving tomorrow for Montana. I've got 5 presentations there, one on the radio and 4 other groups here for the next 8 days or so. But maybe I'll get a little bit better at this. I don't know if I will, but I'd love to have somebody work with somebody who has the oratory skills, organization skills, who can build an organization, somebody who's really good at graphic design. I'd like to get a team together to couple skills is this information in the right hands would permanently cast off outside the election process almost overnight 95% of the U.S. government, period. It is that powerful, it is that important, it is that crucial. So the things we can do, we can either ultimately we'll propose and ratify one of 2 amendments to correct it, but that's, like I say, that's after we kind of get the horses, the wild horses that have run wild, we get it back in the corral, but we can rebuild the corral by containing it, by saying, the 28th Amendment saying, the 17th clause, the 8th section, of the 1st article, shall not be construed to be part of the supreme law of land that binds the states to their judges, period. Thereafter, all the federal legislation that we don't like would still be allowed, that it could never again bind the states. So right now, that legislation has a de facto kind of presumption of legitimacy until we show it's illegitimate. And I can talk to you more, the books talk about that topic for this now.
Well, isn't it just everybody's bound by the dollars?
Well, that's, yes, right, just.
The binding doesn't even have to be by that's where the money comes from.
Right, well, that's just saying, if you get all this federal largesse, or whatever, however that's pronounced, they're all, how do these people become filthy rich by getting all the money coming in the backroom deals and kickbacks and whatever. So, but we can still,
like even our school board here is bound by the state dollars, and the state school board is bound by the federal dollars.
Right.
So, and that's just one area.
Right, but we
it's all very convoluted because of the dollars.
intentionally, but so the other rule, so we can either contain tyranny to DC or we can repeal it forever. We can say, so the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th, which put in prohibition. And so the 21st Amendment, the 18th Amendment, which will be about repeal. So that gives us the second model, so we can look historically to correct our errant diversion away from founding principles that cannot be changed by any federal servant. Again, no member of Congress, no Supreme Court justice, no American president, all of them together at any period of time, all together at all times, have never changed the Constitution, period. They cannot. Only states may ratify the amendments. Members of Congress may propose amendments. We have 11,700 some proposals, 27 have been ratified by the states. So we today have the Constitution that the founders and framers gave us changed only by 27 ratified amendments, period. So we can reclaim, we look at, wouldn't it be great to have what, 5 generations or 8 generations back had. We have that, except that that's changed by 27 amendments. And those amendments have changed very little. So the other, besides containment, we can repeal Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and retrocede the Maryland's land back to Maryland, and the federal forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards back to the states, and we can repeal that entirely, and so we could get rid of this and this, where we would only have this again over every square foot of American soil. So if we repeal Clause 17, gone would be everything that you do not like. See, right now, that Article 6, we're talking about the supreme law of land, it appears that the U.S. Constitution has inherent contradiction between it. That's why everything looks, well, how can this be this dichotomy between, everyday federal action and our founding principles supported by the supreme law of land? It looks like we're schizophrenic and have split personalities. That's because we have two separate forms of government at the opposite end of the spectrum. 95% of their actions are done under this, and only a few percent are done with that. But we can contain this to District of Columbia, or we can repeal it entirely. We say we can repeal, put an amendment together which would repeal that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and thereafter every square foot would be this. And gone would be the Federal Reserve System, all the income tax would still be there, but it wouldn't be done like it is. You'd have, just everything would go back to, you have the main powers that can be directly exercised throughout the Union, and then you have the state powers, and there's no other source of alternate authority. So they're taking an allowed special power, and they use that. Which power do you think members of Congress or federal servants would want to exercise if they get away with it? Would they willingly choose the most limited form of government where they have main parameters, or will they do whatever they want to enrich themselves and their friends because they get away with it? So if you and I do not do our part, learn what's going on, step up, tell others, and get all these people, like I say, if this information got in front of the right people, we could, let's say exposure is 99.9% of an issue. Once the cat is out of the bag, just like in the Wizard of Oz, once Toto pulled back the curtain and Dorothy saw, that's just a sound and light show. It's illusion. It's over. Never again can Dorothy can think that I've got to go to this wizard to try and plead with him to stop doing this, stop doing that. It's game over permanently. The illusion. There is no magic. And so if you had a magic button to push to try to change stuff, well, our opponents haven't changed anything that matters. It's our job to destroy that false illusion. So it should give you I know your mind's probably trying to grasp, looking for straws, but my work, what I try and do is give you a jigsaw puzzle, box top view of how all these pieces of federal tyranny fit together, and it's an allowed special power extended improperly beyond legal boundaries. So yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm just trying to say back what you're saying to us. So does this mean if we actually stopped all this federal power that's going on,
yes,
all the power would be back in our state?
yes.
So the state of Washington, we would be totally sunk.
No, see, but you, no, see, okay, I know, right. No, but listen, okay, let's say if you were a business, let's say you're for a business instead of a state. What's the best way to keep businesses in proper alignment, not price gouging, whatever? Competition. If you had, even today, one state like Montana or Wyoming with just, 600,000, 700,000 people, a million people, whatever, one state going forward on their own would all of a sudden show Washington, the best way to keep Washington, California, Oregon, Massachusetts, and all those states in line is the free states being able to exercise their reserve powers. I know what you're saying, and the first thing is, well, our state here is horrid, but the only way to hold them in check is to free them up, and some of the stuff that I'm talking about here at the federal level applies to the state level with the state constitution, but remember the reserve powers of the states are much, you look at the Washington State Constitution versus the federal constitution, the Washington State Constitution is much thicker, much more involved. So there's lots of that. So but the U.S. Constitution is very narrow. But if we get back to this, the state competition state by state, and have a few, even one or two free states, the radical, progressive, liberal states will be, their legitimacy will pursuing all this will evaporate almost overnight too. So the only way to regain our American birthright of individual liberty, limited government, delegation of powers is by learning what.
Washington D.C. a state.
Well, see that. Well, in these books, I do talk about working with our political adversaries to give them what they want. If we had a nuclear button, it'd be to repeal Clause 17. So even if we, in 1956 or something like that, there was an intergovernmental policy board that looked at the powers because of exclusive legislative powers in the military force and stuff being a problem because divorce laws, marriage, and schooling. And they said we should basically eliminate they want to give up that exclusive legislative authority. Let's go back to this on the military force because it's problematic for the federal. So it's been the established policy for more than 70 years now to get rid of exclusive legislative parcels. Well, now Democrats want D.C. statehood to, so they can get 2 perpetual U.S. senators and another perpetual liberal progressive representative. Okay, so I say, let's give it to them if they will abolish Clause 17. And if we got rid of every square foot of American soil that had this, it'd be game over. Yes, they'd have a progressive liberal Democrat into perpetuity. They could never again do anything to those named powers implemented using necessary proper means, period. If Karl Marx was still alive and he was a member of Congress under this form of government, he could not be any more progressive than almost Thomas Jefferson. So we call their bluff, let's work with you, let's repeal this clause entirely, and as soon as they see that, oh, this is going to backfire on them, something spectacular, they'll put the whole issue up before the whole nation, and so we'd then be able to see that evaluation. You've been pursuing this for decades, why are you not wanting it now? So it'd be a spectacular backfire on them that we could almost maybe get there, we'd maybe get it close to Congress, give it to the states for ratification. Once it's ratified, it'd be game over, none of them, they couldn't do anything except for as it was changed by future amendments. So the future is spectacular. It is involved. I apologize if I'm not able to simplify it as much as I'd like to. Some of the novels out there, I've tried to do that better, to have the characters go back and forth and try to explain things. But it's up to you. Okay, and again, remember, on this flyer, so please get the book, my free book here, take one of those, and also take these at the websites there. Again, you can on this book you can read 7 of the lessons there free of charge. But on this one, it gives you the website for all 12 of the public domain books, and it gives you a way to purchase There's 4 of the books that aren't in print anymore, but, so you can only look at it by a free PDF. But, I'm hoping you'll, even if I haven't done well as far as, I'm hoping that you're kind of, even if you're totally lost, I'm hoping you start looking at some of the information to try and, there's a lot there, I've tried it at different depths. This is a simple book, it's still not necessarily like reading, but I'm just hoping you'll start looking, talking to one another, and start digging into it. Yes, sir.
I might be off this, but it kind of sounds like what you're saying is for us to get back to the United States Constitutional Republic and get rid of the U.S. corporation.
Yeah, so it's, if this type of thing, if you want to call it a corporation, it doesn't matter what form of government it is. Even this has been going on since 1789, so it's not that it's corporation 1871 or whatever, or the other form of government. The form of government doesn't matter. It's the exclusive legislative powers of Congress have been under the Constitution since it was ratified. So it's don't get hooked on a corporation. That just happened to be the latest form of government that it is, but it doesn't matter.
Is the Constitutional Party adhere to the same thing you're talking about?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I don't think, most of what I talk about, I don't know whether people are really talking about it yet. To some extent, some are.
Yeah.
But I think I haven't found it in other, and truthfully, I don't know a lot what other people are doing. I haven't really paid attention.
You're talking about education, I just wondered if that's a deal over maybe.
Right, and so I mean, if this gets out and somebody who has a soapbox already in the audience,
Yeah.
it can get very done quickly. Truthfully, it seemed like when I was at the Washington State Convention in April, or I went to the Montana Convention in June. The incumbents, the people who are in the party, they didn't really have anything to do with me.
Right.
So they established, I'm not this is all, I'm self-taught, and I don't know anybody to speak of. So no one knows me. Yeah, but I'm hoping to change that. I appreciate your help in, say opening the doors for me, joining kind of efforts or whatever. If you have skills I don't, love to talk to you.
Have you considered doing podcasts?
No, I wouldn't mind being guests on them, but I don't want to. I have a real hard time of, like I tried to have a group, it was during COVID, some or right before it, then during it, but it's, for 2 years, no one showed up. Not a single soul for over 24 months. So I feel I'm really good at being a lone wolf and going forward. And like I say, if we're lost, okay, I'm going to go out on my own to try and find a way to civilization and come back and now drag people along. But yeah. So any other questions? Hey, well, thank you. Just a second. I'll be out front there if anybody has questions.
Alrighty, so let me just close this in a word of prayer and then we'll be adjourned. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you tonight for our founders. We thank you for what they accomplished. We thank you that they tried to have limited government even though it's grown way beyond that. We pray you give us wisdom in looking for local candidates that could steer the ship locally, school board and city council back to the right. And Father, we thank you that you know all things and that we can depend on you and that you are absolutely trustworthy. We thank you now for this time and we thank you and stand adjourned. Amen.